Hello all, I'm Somnath here. In today's video, I'm going to show how the new joiners have to present the microservices. In the sticky file over here, I have some steps noted down. For this video, I'm going to be giving a presentation on GTS Employment Agreement Service. So the first and most important part is to give an overview of the requirement and the UX design. So let me try to explain what the requirement is. So employment agreement service. So when we as a candidate go to a company or go to a recruiter to get a job, we have an agreement between us saying, we're going to be working for this certain amount of months, and per month I would be receiving certain amount of salary, and our homing address, our permanent address, the mobile number, contact information, many others, etc. So in this digital world right now, where everything goes is updating in according to the technologies, here we have a digital agreement over here that is called employment agreement service, which is going to have a digital agreement between the recruiter and the candidate, and would save this agreement in the database. So here's the UX page. There is a UX design of how the agreement service would look. So this is the UX design. Here we have got the headers, then the footer, and then here is the uh, um, input which the user has to enter, such as offer, reference, date, name, address, email address. Then in the subject, that is, this is the actual content. We are having a pre-written sentence where we are just filling up the informations which would vary from candidate to candidate. And at the bottom, then we have save the details. Like, we have an option to save these details, reset the details to the old one. Then also have an option to export the PDF, and then give a digital signature over here, and then submit the contract. So this is the UX design. And before we, as a developer, Java developer, go into developing, we need to know what has to be created before we start creating. So this covers up our first point, that is, give an overview of the requirement and the UX design. Next comes the DB design. So here, over here, the DB design simply has elements, all the name of the elements that are to be filled, their data types, then the condition whether it is nullable or not. So nullable simply represents that is it mandatory or not. So I mean, for the columns which says no, this represents that it cannot be null. That is, in other words, each and every uh, column name with no nullability has to have a data in it. And then we have a column called primary key, that is GTS employment agreement ID. Primary key simply represents that it would get like the data for this particular row would get filled in through the API itself. That is a agreement ID. It's generally in a way like the number of ID created, and each ID would have a unique key using which the program can represent that particular or a specific ID. For example, if me as a candidate signs on a agreement ID saying 2, then the recruiter who is recruiting me is supposed to be looking at the agreement ID number 2. instead of looking at some other agreements. So this is a primary key. So it simply represents that it is the unique ID to spot the agreement, spot a specific agreement. Then comes foreign key. Foreign key simply represents that this particular row or the column name is dependent on the GTS user ID. So it is dependent on GTS user table, and in GTS user table it is looking for GTS user ID column. That is, when the agreement generator ID is created, it would be equivalent to the GTS user ID over here. I mean, it is mostly in a way like, if a user with ID 1 is creating the employer agreement, then that agreement would be saved in that user ID itself. Similarly, we have got candidate ID over here, and this is a foreign key to GTS user ID again, and there are many others at the bottom. Then we have comments, and then we have is unique. So is unique, as the word itself represents, employment agreement ID would have a unique ID, so that we can point out to a specific agreement itself. So this was our DB design. Then we go to explain the API design. Now in API design, so here is our API design. In API design, have we simply use the URL, that is the endpoint. We store our functionalities, like the list of functionalities. Then we store the method that is performing. So we have got various methods such as post, create, put, get, and delete, and many others. So in simple words, method simply represents the CRUD operations. Then we have got the request JSON. So request JSON simply represents the template, or in other words, if I try to relate it with the UX design over here, we have a reference uh, uh, section where we are trying to give a reference name, and similarly we are having a reference section over here which is pulling the name through its ID. So this simply means the user which is saved in that particular ID would get pulled in. The name would automatically get printed or implemented over here. So as you can see over here, we have our reference ID which is set to var varchar, where we can enter the name, and this is the request payload which would store it by using the post method. And then we have a condition. So this is basically a condition, that is, if the employment agreement is created successfully, then we would just throw the response JSON, that is success true message says employment agreement is created successfully, and the status code 201. Similar, then we have got the mock URLs, comments, and QA passed or not. So this basically is a column for the QA testers who are gonna test the condition and the functionality, whether they are working or not, and based on that they would write over here saying done or not done. That depends. So similarly, we have got a functionality where it fails, such as over here, if you can see, there's a condition that says if the field ID is empty, such as you can see, the reference offer ID is empty, offer reference ID is empty. So we would basically send a exception message saying, it cannot be empty. So this is the API design that we need to explain. Next comes explain the Postman collection file. How to import and export the collection files. So to do this, you need a postman, and in here I have already imported my postman collections. You can just click on import over here, then just go to your file directory, and it would the postman collections would be saved in a folder called postman collections. And there are two types, mainly two types over here. One is AWS and one is local. So this is mainly made for AWS is made for the API which is being tested on cloud database, and local is the one which is being tested on the local database. So here is our first REST API, where we are trying to create an employment agreement. And to before we try to create an employee agreement, we need to make sure that we have a valid user. And to have a valid user, I am running another microservice called identity service, which take cares of the user creation, such as the registration and the login. And here we also have to run the employment agreement service. So this is the main file of employment agreement service which we run to, and we need to wait for both the projects to start successfully. So in by using identity service, we get a user token which is unique, so that not everyone gets to log into our profile. Passwords are to be kept secured, and every time we log in we get a specific token. And currently I have already created a user. I've already created a user with the user ID 24 over here, and I would simply log in into that to basically get my user token. So I have my identity service postman files imported too, so that I can log in using it. So if I send this request right now, so this is connected to the microservice which I was running, and it has given me a unique token. And this token is basically saved in the database in the user tokens table over here. And as you can see, it gave a new update saying that user ID number 24 has created a new token. So I basically have to copy this token and go to my post method of candidate agreement service and manually add this token into my authorization, so that it the API knows which user is trying to create the agreement. So I have pasted my new token, saved it, and now I try to send the post method, where this is my payload, this is my URL right over here, and these are the informations of the agreement. And when I send this, the employment agreement is created successfully. So now I can go to my database right over here. It says employment agreements, and as you can see, a new agreement by employer ID 24 is being created. And you can see today's date, it's 19 over here. uh, it's 19/6/2024. Then at the end, you have a status called saved. So the new agreement is saved in the database right now. So this was the post method, and there are many other API conditions over here, such as this uh, payload is just to test whether the candidate agreement generator, if the candidate agreement generator ID is invalid, would it throw an exception, or would it give the success response? As you can see, as expected, it catches out that the agreement generator ID is invalid because it is set to negative. Now, if we can try to test some other requests, such as deactivate agreement. Over here, we uh, make sure that the URL is set to the right one, and then in the body here we give a employment agreement ID to basically deactivate it. And currently we are trying to deactivate the third agreement over here, and if we send it, it says it has been deactivated successfully. Now if we reopen this table and go check the status over here, it says it's closed. That simply means it has been deactivated. Then we can update an agreement. So here, as usual, we make sure the link is right. Then go to the request payload. Here we are trying to edit agreement ID number 2, where as you can see, over here in agreement number 2, there are certain informations such as uh, let's basically take a specific column. So identification card name, it's set to Aadhaar over here, and over here the identification card name is, we're trying to update it to voter ID card. Now if I send this request, it says it has been updated successfully, and if I run this table to check it, and it should be updated over here also, as you can see over here, in it has been updated successfully. Then we have got many other postman REST APIs, such as one of them is delete. Here we can basically uh, delete a agreement from the database, uh, and it is deleted based on the by directly calling the URL over here. As you can see, we are going to be deleting by employee agreement number 3. So right now, as you can see, we have a agreement of ID 3. Now by using this API request, it is supposed to delete it, and I've got my successful message over here. And when I refresh the table, as you can clearly see, it is being deleted. So this is how you need to uh, show the postmans are working or not. The rest that covers up this point, and then comes explain the code. Now before we start explaining the code, we the best practice is to first, you know just keep it clean and start from the beginning. So right now, we open this file. In this we have the following folders. That has a src main folder, which simply contains two types of files. One is the Java files, which simply has the the classes in it, the code, and the other one called resources, which has a application property file. So here in this property file we have stored the database connectivity informations. So is the URL of our database, the username and the password, and then we have got the postman connectivity properties also. Then in this JRE system library, this simply contains all the imported jar files. That is, whenever we import a certain object or a class from the Java library, all those jar files are stored in JRE system library folder. Then we have got a folder called Maven dependencies. These also has the jar files which are stored to run the application. So there are two types of jar files. So these jar files in Maven dependencies are basically the user defined jar files which we are importing through the pom.xml. So we're basically downloading them through the pom.xml file. So here we have our dependencies, which basically downloads the jar file and stores it in the Maven dependency folder. And JRE system library has the jar files, which are basically the built-in jar files which we import in our classes. And then we have got the API design folder, API DB design folder, then the DB scripts folder. So in DB scripts folder, we simply have the database scripts which can be directly entered in the SQL workbench to create the tables as you see in this corner. Then we have got our Postman collection folder, which simply contains the Postman collections to be testing. And then we have got the UX page and pom.xml, etc. So this was the overview of the folder structure. Now the next step would be to explain the execution flow of the code, and that is, in simple words, when we send a request. For example, let's say we are trying to create an agreement right now. So when I click this send button, what is actually happening? So we the request or the control goes to a folder called a controller folder, and we have an agreement controller Java file over here. This contains the code that is taking in the data over here. It's over here from the request payload. So request body. So this is, first thing is, this is a post mapping method that if you can see over here, it's a post mapping method. And then we are checking into the request body. So this is our request payload over here where we are giving our inputs. And then it goes to the we have a class called agreement request model. If we go in the agreement request model, we have uh, all the um, all the column names stored in agreement request model.java, where all the data is getting stored, and by using getters and setters we are accepting the data and setting the data in our database right over here. And once the data is set successfully, the control goes to all these if conditions. Here we are trying to check whether each and every ID is set properly or not. That is, we are mainly checking whether it is null or not. If it is null, we are throwing an exception saying it's invalid. And if everything runs fine, we are simply storing it in the agreement ID, like I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this part, that remember in the DB design we had a employment agreement ID, which is a primary key, and we don't fill it manually. Instead, it is done through the program. As you can see over here, the next agreement ID is normally created by incrementing the current, incrementing the last agreement ID. That is, as you seen, I have already sent the request, and previously there was four agreements. I mean, three were out of there were three, and when I refresh it now, there is a new agreement ID created with a ID number 5. So this piece of code sets the agreement ID over here, and uh, uh, then we have got the other mapping methods also. Here we have the put mapping method. It again goes to the request body. It goes to the agreement request model file over here, and then sets the data into these variables. Then if we go further into our files, we have got an entity folder which basically contains the uh, declaration of the variable name by using this keyword for all the columns. Like, it is basically connecting to the database. So it includes agreement entity, GTS cities table, GTS companies table, and so on. So these simply contains the name of the column and the variable name that we are using in our request payload. Then in this exception folders, we basically have all the user defined exceptions, such as custom exception, duplicate exceptions, so that when we are trying to execute, we get to know if there is some issues. Then we have got our response methods over here. Then we have a folder called security, so authorization filter.java. So this file right over here simply checks whether the token that is entered over here, like over here, matches with the token in the database or not. If the token matches, only then we we are getting the permission to perform all the REST API or the CRUD operations. So here I have explained the code base also. I mean, these are the important things that has to be presented during the demo of a particular microservice. That's all for my presentation right now. I hope you guys have understood things. If you have doubts, feel free to ping your question in the comment section. Thank you very much. Don't have a good day. Have a great day ahead.